how long it takes with the delay. Oh, Miss Sarah Schulman. I have conflict.
I was about to say, when you were liking the beginning, I was like, give it time.
Yeah. The start, it started, the first two parts were definitely, I enjoyed more than the second, the latter half.
Yeah.
But let's see who joins us here in the video. Okay. I think it should be live on YouTube.
It is. Mara texted and I put a thingy in.
Oh, okay. I've never I always forget to look on YouTube and I just stay right here. Hello. Look at all of us here to discuss this conflicting book.
As long as we're not abusive, it's all good.
No, yeah. I mean, I think we've accomplished the thesis of the book in the Discord already, which is engage with the material.
Hi, Shannon. I hope you're having a wonderful day. Hello. Hey, best name ever.
Truly.
Every time. This is the greatest. Howdy, hi. Hello. So did y'all read it physical, audio, ebook, both? I did hybrid, this and the audio, on the highest speed I could get it, which was only 2 because it was on Scribd, but I made it through.
I did audio. I think I did 2 or 2.35 speed because I had it on Libby. So Libby lets you go very high.
I listened to it on audio 1.5 speed because my brain just won't allow me to get any faster than that. And also sometimes because Miss Schulman she doesn't really have a very varied range of inflection and tone shift. So I just had to sometimes skim the ebook as well because the words were just coming and going from my ears like, what? No normal person talks like this.
Yeah, I read it audio the first time, and then I skimmed back through the physical. Yeah, it's a dense book. It's not, but it's not very long.
Yeah, that was the positive. I love this, and I fell asleep. I too did that. Yeah, have thoughts. Okay. So, well, first, because this is great rating, if you're here, you probably know who I am. So I'll let all of these lovely people introduce themselves, their channel, whatever you want to say. Tell the people who you are.
All right. I'm Angela. My channel is Literature Science Alliance. I primarily read SFF, so science fiction, fantasy, normally adult, sometimes young adult. So you can come over if you want a lot of speculative fiction. I mean, I also read other stuff like this nonfiction. Are we giving our rating for the book right now too?
Yeah.
Okay. I guess rating wise, it's probably like a 2.5 for me. But like if I was a teacher grading this, it's like a C paper. Like it's like, I see what you tried to do. You did put in some research, but I have issues with your execution. Like, it felt like if this was a paper, they were trying to reach a page count and it got a little too long. Mm-hmm. And I didn't quite get the structures, organizational pathway. And yeah, I did audiobooks. So sometimes some of that's just, I don't have the visual cues, but
yeah,
that's about where I'm at. I don't have, I think, as many aggressive thoughts as other people, but I don't have, it's fine. It's okay.
I feel fine.
Okay, so I am Reija from the channel The Bookfinch. I am a Finnish booktuber. I am also a dumpster of eclectic reading taste. So I read a bunch of stuff, mostly SFF, but I am open to trying anything once. And I gave this book 2.5 stars. It was middling, but on the low tier of middling for me. I had there were so many interesting ideas, and the execution was just you keep using these phrases and these words, but I don't know they mean exactly what you think they mean.
Yes, I feel that.
I'm Mara from Books Like Whoa. It's my fault we're reading this, apparently. Because I think Jess heard me talking about this book in a wrap-up I did, and I basically said, like, I think this would be a really interesting book club pick because I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff in this book. I gave it a 4-star because I think I was assessing this more as like, this reminds me a lot of the philosophy I read in grad school. And I think in that kind of genre, it's actually a pretty good version of what it is. I don't think I think it has some interesting language that it contributes to this area of discourse. I definitely have critiques of it. Like it's not a 4-star because like, oh, I love everything she has to say, but more just like, I do think that this is an interesting book. I do think that it has some interesting language that it can contribute, especially I think to online discourse.
Yeah.
Less so in some of her real world application. Like I think IRL, some of the things that she has to say don't work. But I think in terms of like online discourse, this can be, I think, helpful language to talk about some of the recurrent themes that we see in book community almost everywhere. So
yeah. Yes. Well, on Goodreads I gave it a 3, but I was between like 2.5, 3. Because again, like a lot of us, we've all touched on a lot of the ideas, especially with the parts that are really relevant to like online discourse. I was like, ooh, tabbing, noting, and I'm like, ooh, yes, a lot of things. And I mean, I know she's older, and so I think some of maybe her things that we'll get into are more from like the generation she grew up in, whereas now it's like, ma'am, I do not want to talk about. And but some of the parts, like the second part when she was just getting in, I don't know if she argued it as well as I would have liked, like when she was talking about Palestine and like with the social media posts. I don't know what I got really out of it. So that's why I'm interested in this, because I don't really know what she was trying to do there. In the last, I was like, okay, well maybe I need to actually, because sometimes I would just be listening while playing The Sims, but I was like, let me get out the book and follow along. But it was literally like, I don't know if y'all can see if you didn't have the physical. These are just tweets or Facebook posts, and then there'd be like a paragraph of text and talking about celebrities from Rihanna to who, and I'm just like,
the Twitter, Facebook whole that part, especially on audio, it was a struggle bus. And also, please, there were so many instances where she would include things like, oh, Miss Schulman, I really liked your post. And I was, okay, please, please.
Yeah, that she could have cut out. I do think, again, I don't know, maybe this is just the way that I consumed this book. Oh, side note, also, I was listening, sorry, I'm being very messy and all over the place with this comment. Well, I was listening to a podcast about musicals called Musicalsplaining, and Sarah Schulman wrote the novel that Rent ripped off, and she didn't get any credit for it. So
what?
Interesting side note there.
She wrote La Vivo M?
No. So he took both.
Because I thought it was based off a play, but maybe I'm wrong.
It's based off of that, but then also the real life, in the East Village, everyone is queer AIDS. That is from a book she wrote, apparently, but she didn't really get credit. Anyway. I think I agree that as a book, this book doesn't really work. I think as a philosophical treatise, it is better, but I totally agree on the tweet section of this doesn't work in a book.
No.
This doesn't belong, because I think there's some interesting ideas interspersed in the tweet dumpage.
Yeah.
If we think about the whole, because what I got from that section was that she was trying to critique the way mainstream news outlets were discussing, and to a certain extent are discussing, because it's a very topical situation right now regarding Palestine, it's happening right now again as we speak. In fact, it never stopped. But she's trying to critique and sort of deconstruct this idea of how there's a disconnect between how mainstream news outlets are handling the topics and talking about it versus how people on the actual ground are talking about it and trying to spread information, and how it is sort of communally shared in social media spaces. But I don't think the actual execution worked. I actually would have been really interested if she would have used tools like Google Trends and stuff and looked at how certain key phrases like Palestine or Free Palestine or Israel were trending at that time, versus how many times they were mentioned, for example, in news broadcasts, because you can actually do that and it is quite easy. So,
and I think that chapter, wasn't it meant to just highlight how bad shunning is specifically in her whole like thesis, is how you get into shunning? And I guess I didn't think that transition was good or very clear. Like, I don't know, I guess in my head, if your whole thing is like a philosophy thing, okay, you need to really sometimes walk people through it and be like, this is what I'm trying to prove right now. These are my thoughts, and then here's the proof. And I feel like that didn't happen in that chapter. It was just a big life example that I got very, like, I actually, that chapter outside of the book I liked, if only because it's like, oh, this is like an interesting thing for me to know about what Palestinian online discourse was like, but that's also not why I picked up the book. Like, this wasn't my nonfiction Palestine read. This was a different read.
So some philosophy does work that way, but not a lot.
Okay.
It's not, some of it is trying to make an argument. No.
I think I'm frozen.
No,
you're not.
Well, not to us, maybe to you.
You're not frozen.
The joys of international internet.
Yeah.
Oh no. Well, teach me about the philosophy nonfiction, because that is something I have no experience in. I'm more basing this off my preference as someone consuming a philosophy text.
So it depends. Well, it also gets into the whole like, we've been left our own devices. It depends on kind of like what school of philosophy, and like there's continental philosophers versus like the British/American tradition, who are more in line with kind of having a structured argument. But like there's also like this, what I took was that she was trying to take more of like what is it? Poetics? I forget what the word, but basically like poetic philosophy, where it's not as much about like having a strict argument. It's more about like diving into your own experience and then using that. Yay, she's back. Okay. Left alone. And then using that to like explore ideas. So I think and again, like this is why I don't think it works necessarily that well. It's just like a general book. But like, if you're expecting a strict like argument with like, here are the supporting, like a historical argument, for example, like, okay, my thesis is that the 30 Years' War was precipitated by long-standing tensions between different factions within the Catholic Church. Okay, that's my argument. Now I'm going to have my first chapter, like, here's where Sweden fit into that. Here's where France, like, and you build it from there. That's not really what this kind of philosophy is doing. It's more about like, it's an exploratory journey. And in her prologue, she specifically is kind of talking about, she's not an academic, and that she's really coming at as a novelist. So like that was the other reason why I was kind of expecting it to be more in the like theopoetic type of philosophy, where it's more like about storytelling and kind of like free association.
But here's the thing. The best parts of the book were the ones where she actually used an academic approach with statistics and background studies to like...
For what you like. Right?
Yeah.
Like I just don't know that that's what she's trying to do in the whole book.
Well, that is
right. Like, and it's totally fine if that you just don't like it. Like that's fair. But I think that's not necessarily her whole project.
I personally have to admit that I'm more of like, I fall more in line with the argumentative postmodernist type of philosophers in general.
Yes.
So Like,
well, and like I do think, and I don't know if I said this offline or here or where it happened, but like her in the introduction, she was up front with like she wanted it more to be a place that was exploratory and that people would start engaging with it, and like it was meant to get gears turning, and maybe your gears wouldn't turn the same way hers did, but it would inspire you to engage with this concept, which I think whether we liked it or didn't definitely happened. I was for sure, even when I was angry with her examples or being like, that's not how I would handle this conflict situation or whatever that we'll probably talk about more, I was like still thinking about it. And and there was a new lens to it, right? Like
it
she did
a reaction, if nothing else.
For sure.
yeah.
A lot.
Yeah.
And I will say that in terms of like being upfront about the fact that she doesn't want people, like she doesn't expect and she doesn't want people to agree with her on the spot. Like her whole thesis statement is that the book is meant to arouse discussion rather than be a sort of self-help book for a thing or a specific or offer specific solutions.
Yeah.
But then again, she also has like a habit of presenting her own way of doing the thing as the sort of authority.
Yeah, like she
that's
does
what it comes across to me.
No, it was the same for me as like when she was giving examples, it was interesting because her whole thesis is about situations are nuanced, things are complicated, you shouldn't react in like binary things of completely shun or maybe completely forgive. You're supposed to do that. But then every one of her examples was this was the right way to handle the situation.
That's
the only right way to do it. And I'm like,
yes.
That's what you just said, nuance.
Yeah, it's
like well, and I think to me, the two biggest downfalls of this book in terms of the praxis, excuse me, I don't know why I'm choking on my own spit, but whatever.
Oh, Lord.
I empathize. I am on my own spit choker most of the time. So.
Is one, I just don't think she understands specifically how like online stuff works. And so anytime that came in, I was like, this reads to me like someone who is not a native of this space.
Very out of touch.
Using
email.
Yeah.
Email.
Like, I just don't think she understands, like, for instance, like on Twitter. I actually read a really interesting article about this. I'll try to find it and send it to you just for the description. But it was talking about how like people get mad about the sort of like sloganeering that ends up happening on Twitter, where it's like, if somebody brings up, like, for instance, All Lives Matter is a perfect example. Someone who is not an online native doesn't understand that All Lives Matter is a shorthand for a repetitious argument that's happened over and over and over again that is racist at its core. But if you're sort of like naively coming into it, you may say like, well, but like, okay, this isn't, you know, maybe they're coming from a good faith place, or like you kind of don't understand that there's like this entire history of like trolling and argumentation that's happened. And like, that's what she reminded me a lot of in this book, of like not understanding the full context of how like online conversation works.
I mean, honestly, I feel like it goes like on the other side of the spectrum with BLM. It's another like the way people intentionally sort of misrepresent it and misunderstand the like, okay, so you're saying this, which means that you think every other life is invalid or something. No, because that whole slogan was born in an online space where you have to be very concise with the way you word things.
Yes.
So like expecting it to contain all little bits of nuance in that one fast slogan it's a bad faith argument.
Yes.
In and of itself.
And so I think she doesn't understand that. And then the other thing I critique her on is that I think she has a completely unrealistic expectation of people who essentially are in the position of being marginalized to reach out to people who are doing the marginalization. Like that to me just seems like a fundamental like ask. Like you can't ask people to be up to do that. Just
yeah, I mean, even if you remove the whole bigger marginalized thing, you just take it to like a person-person interaction with conflict. Like, in order to resolve conflict, especially since we're saying conflict is when someone doesn't have the greater power, right? Like that's our definition. It still requires two people to do it. So there's only so much you can do as an individual. And like, I don't think the book asks a lot of emotional stability from a person to do. And I'm like, that only works in a system where everyone has access to mental health care and wants to engage with that. And that's not a system we live in. Like the system we live in right now, people don't have the tools or support to be in a place to do what she's asking people to do every day.
Or possibly the propensity. Like some people just don't want to do that work. And I don't think that that necessarily makes them a bad person. Like,
okay, I'll stay over here and you can, you know, mind your business and we can cut ties. You don't have to, I don't know, in general, like the ideas, but then her explanations, something like she talked about, because I think, so her whole concept of the whole conflict is not abuse and that things kind of get lost in translation. People can escalate things. You need to talk about things. Totally get, we're on the online space. A lot of things are in text. So tweets and, or, you know, text emails. You can't read a person's body language, hear their voice intonation. But again, something that isn't practical is always having an in-person conversation or talking to someone on a phone to resolve that. But I saw a comment saying we're not taught to handle conflict. So I went into this wanting that to be more of like the focus, and I guess it was more what Mara was explaining. You know, the approach she had was different, but that was like still my biggest take home was some of that, even though I don't agree with everything she says, because especially now I feel like on the internet it's instantly there's a different opinion that equates that's harmful. Like that person is out to get you instead of, but it's like, I also don't want to call them on the phone, girl. They might be in another country. I can't do that.
Well, and like, again, you could try and call them, but that assumes that person will pick up the phone call. Like, I feel like she completely ignores every time that the other person might not engage. I think part of this was her internal frustration that when she's tried to handle conflict in her life, people weren't picking up her phone calls, right? Like that comes up a lot. And it's like, well, you can't force people to do things.
You wouldn't know how many, like especially when I was a teenager, how many people's phone numbers I had saved under "don't answer the phone."
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Like.
Yeah. Well, and you know, there's the other thing that I found. It was both insightful but also frustrating is that she would have these moments of applying an idea in a way that I was like, yeah, I agree with that. But then, so like, for instance, in the Palestine section, which to me was the most resonant, probably just because it's been back in the news cycle recently. You know, I really liked some of what she was saying about how the crime becomes saying what's happening, not the bad thing that's happening. So with respect to what was happening to Palestinians in that specific instance, the crime becomes naming that that's what's happening, not the fact that you're killing people. So like, I thought that was good. But then like, what is really the resolution there? Because like, I agree that that's a problem, but then are you asking the Palestinians to reach out? Like what? This is where I constantly was like, okay, I like that idea. Like, I like that you're playing with this idea. I think that's really helpful language to talk about that idea. But then like, what is I just feel like the praxis of this gets just completely lost. Cause I'm like, how do you expect that to be resolved? Do Palestinians, like, who would they even call? Like, who are they supposed to call?
There's a hotline. And
like, it's basically like at this stage, like if it's just if talking about the whole Israel-Palestine settler colonial situation, nothing is gonna happen. Like I've just been reading like Joe Sacco's Palestine, which was originally written in the 90s. So this is a thing that keeps coming up the news cycle every few years because the situation is ongoing. It has never stopped, and it is not going to stop until like actual government organizations like the US and stuff stop giving Israel military funding and stuff. So it's incredibly naive to assume that the general populace can have anything other to give at this stage to Palestine, or any substantial help to give in that situation other than donations and empathy, and like trying to spread the word, because it's a much bigger thing. And I just feel like there's this sort of like public shaming into action, which is like, I get where she's coming from, because it's frustrating that people don't talk about the thing and don't talk about the actual issues, but also at that stage could have been a little bit poignant to point out that it is a much bigger thing. Like at some level, it becomes a hurdle that is too tall for just a few people on the internet to cross, you know?
And also with the Palestine thing, which someone correct me if it was in the text and I just missed it in the audio experience, like we talk about the definition of abuse, meaning the power imbalance and harm. Mm-hmm. I mean, especially when she's talking about the Palestine abuse, even if it's not our now, it's not a conflict. That's what we keep saying, right? It's not two equal parties in a debate.
Yeah.
There's one very powerful party and there's one with significantly less power. So in this book of Conflict is Not Abuse, this whole chapter is about an abusive relationship, and we're not talking about it in that lens.
But I feel like that was the point, though. Like the point was like the same as with the HIV/AIDS chapter. The whole point was that the power of a government over marginalized individuals that have the least amount of power in that situation. Like I feel like she chose those two instances of abuse of power from a governmental level to try to sort of strengthen her argument about what is abuse and what is conflict and argumentation.
And I guess this is where my preference would be, still keeping with her exploratory philosophy journey. I think it could have still been a little bit more straightforward to me. I could have used the tool, I guess, maybe to know that this was the intention. Because I also was equally confused when we got to the AIDS discussion in Canada, which was terrifying and useful. But I was also like, this feels very different than these little personal stories you've been talking about that you're highlighting. This is not abuse, this is conflict. And in those situations, she actually says that directly. But in these bigger government ones, we don't say, this is not conflict, this is abuse. Like she doesn't reverse it. And I do remember situations where she's very much spelling out, this was just a conflict, not abuse, but she doesn't reverse it when she has the flipped government abusing.
This is abuse.
Which I just would have benefited from. Like, obviously, this is, her.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah,
Yeah. Because that's why I was confused with the Palestine part. So I'm like, how is this fitting in with what the rest of what you said when you're not like obviously stating what you've said before in this section?
Yeah. Well, and like, that's where it's like, she does have these moments of the praxis coming into it that I'm like, yes, okay, I like this, like where she's talking about like specifically people calling the cops, especially like, let's say like nice white ladies calling the cops on Black people. Like this is, to me, that's like a great moment of an example of like, don't do that.
Yes.
Because you are having a conflict that you are just unable to manage. And so you are going to turn this into an abusive situation by bringing in this third party actor who has power in a way that is like coercive and like dangerous. So instead of having that, like have an actual conversation. Like if you're mad that somebody is like blocking you in your driveway, don't call the cops. Go talk to your neighbor. Say like, hey, I'd love us to like come to a resolution on this, as opposed to me calling the police.
Although to be fair, I think in that case, like for me as a Finnish person, we have a very different relationship with our police force because our police force is university trained and in conflict resolution and stuff, because it is one of their main duties. In that case, it's like this book is also kind of narrow in its scope because it is very US centric.
That is very, very true. Yeah.
So that is just something that, although I will also point out that it would have been very good of her to sort of like, if you think about abusive situations, the Venn diagram of police officers who are domestic abusers, like globally, because it is a profession that tends to facilitate that kind of behavior no matter where you are. So that could have been an interesting bit of statistics to bring into that discussion, like whose side is the police officer in that situation gonna, you never know.
Yeah. I saw that in the Discord. A lot of people were talking about that, and that could have been a really good point for her to bring up. But that, I think, Mara, and one of my notes I put on the side, like, white ladies, like, as a note to the side.
Yes.
One part that I tabbed that just is kind of a general thing that I really liked. She said, people may feel angry, frustrated, upset, but this does not mean they are being abused. They could instead be in conflict. Instead of identifying as a victim, they might be, as Matt Brim suggested, conflicted. Therefore, the fact that one person is suffering does not inherently mean that the other party is to blame. The expectation that we will never feel badly or anxious or confused is an unreasonable expectation and doesn't automatically mean that someone else is abusing us. These emotions are part of the human experience. And I think online and in real life, it's just gotten to the place where something's not going your way, or you don't like this certain person to be in this neighborhood or in this place. It's gone to, you are hurting me. And those definitely parts like that. I'm like, yes, I need this to be sent out into the world.
Well, and like parts like that I agree with, but also say you aren't in an abusive situation, you are in conflict, and you're still being made feel negatively because of the situation you're in. I don't think that means that you aren't allowed to feel upset that someone made you feel upset, though. And I feel like the book makes it feel like you just need to tough it up and like, you know what I mean? Like if someone hurts me and it is a conflict, I'm not being abused, I feel like I should still be allowed to that emotion.
And here's the thing, like if someone says like, okay, I'm going to like give an example, like let's say that Sarah would come to me and say something to me, and I would be upset that she said something to me that I like she used wording that I wasn't comfortable with, and I called her out on that and said, excuse me, would you please word it a little bit differently, or can you apologize? Am I then being an instigator of conflict with her when I'm making a reasonable request of like proper, human interaction?
Yes, you're starting like, don't do that.
And actually, like, this is where, and I want to be so clear, I know nothing about if this author is actually this way. So I just want to be crystal clear about this. This is just what made me think of. This made me think of like some of the conflict that I think turns into abuse around pronouns for trans-identified people, especially from like perfs, basically, of like, okay, it is a basic area of respect of like, if I have a name that I want to go by or whatever, like you can just do that. But then it becomes coercive, or like I think in her rubric, there seems to be this implication of like, okay, if somebody won't respect that, I need to go to them and like try to like persuade. I don't know exactly what the resolution there is. If like fundamentally somebody won't respect something that you have put out there, like those are places where I struggle to see how her rubric really works, because it's like I agree it's conflict, but it's like abusive conflict. I don't know. Like that was like an area that I'm like,
I would also say that because the subtitle of her book is like the duty to repair, I would also say that the duty to repair is not always like universally lateral, that each person is equal, that each person equally has the duty to repair a situation, for example.
Thank you. That's where I'm trying to get to. Well, translated my ramblings. Yes, exactly that. Like, why do I have a duty to make you try to?
Yeah.
Well, and this also reminded me a lot of call in versus call out culture, because I had listened to the podcast that had the kind of creator of call in culture. And even she says in the podcast, like, I'm not talking about calling in people that don't fundamentally believe that human rights exist. Like, I'm not trying to call someone in who's on the extreme. I'm talking about these people who like can be convinced and like you know, it's in, you know, call outs more like cancel culture. And it's like, there's still like vast nuance in that. And I found that that's my more close, like internet way of like handling conflict, is like thinking about, is this a human that is worth conversing with and bringing? Do I have the mental energy to do that?
Sometimes
and
it's not worth it.
And, you know, and sometimes they just really don't want to respect you. And like, sometimes you don't, that's not your call to just, you don't have to keep putting yourself through that pain.
Yeah, like for example, when it comes to, you know, terms like pronouns, like for example, I am someone who uses they them pronouns. So like people like to present the trans and non-binary community as sort of like screeching children who don't have any sort of capacity to handle any sort of emotional stress. And there's this sort of idea that's just right, like so false, because I'm like, I am completely capable of handling someone misgendering and whatnot. It's just that I just look at that situation and be like, okay, was it a mistake that happened? If so, I will gently correct and we can move on. Or is it intentional and continuous, which is like, sometimes it's just a battle that I don't want to fight. And also there's just that, okay, this is a signal to me that person doesn't earn they don't deserve my respect. Yeah. So I will like have a signal in that case where I will proceed to act in my own interest and in my own interest of safety in that situation. But it's like I don't understand where the idea of like screeching children comes in the conflict.
Sarah Schulman seems to have, even though she talks about nuance, she seems to have very like, it's either this or this, where some things, like you were saying, it's like abusive conflict. Like I feel like some things maybe are just a conflict, but then a little more like there's different, and I don't think she went into that enough. It was like, this is conflict or abuse, and like it's one or the other. But another part I did like to the book, she was kind of talking about people's kind of their personal lives and personal experiences and how that colors or can color in a conflict. So one part, she said, people may be part of negative friendships, families, or communities who attack outsiders instead of being self-critical. They may be receiving encouragement to blame and scapegoat others. They may live within groups, relationships, or families that do not tolerate the admission of mistakes, and that reinforces ideologies about each other in order to maintain illusions of righteousness. And this pressure resulting in the action of collectively deflecting blame does not mean that the person being blamed is abusive. In fact, it says nothing at all about that person except that they are in turn being caused great pain for no reason. And so I think when I was thinking of that I was thinking about Twitter, and then just different conversations that come up on Twitter, Twitter in general, and just how different things that people are going through or their experiences probably color a lot of how they react to other people's things. And of course, somebody else is coming in with all of theirs, and it can just meet in the middle and become this really a mess. But so I thought that was an interesting point. Not like that's like always a good reason for how some people act on Twitter, but I didn't think about that before.
Well, and this was a point I liked, but it was also the point where I'm like, if you're bringing this up in a way to help people problem solve and handle conflict, like being self-aware to know when you're acting out because of your past experience. I mean, for me, that took a lot of therapy that I luckily was able to get. Like, that's not like a thing that I innately knew. So, and not everyone has the time or access or even wants to do therapy because of the stigma. So it's like, in order to have a society where everyone is self-aware enough to realize, oh, I'm feeling this way because of my past.
Yes.
Like,
I would also say that not all therapists are created equal. So someone may have gone to therapy and been completely turned against it because of a bad experience. So it's like, it's a very complicated and complex situation, which is why everyone should have a right to public therapy, free of charge or low cost, and I will die on this hill.
Well, well, and this goes back to what we were talking about of duty to repair. It's like, okay, how much of a duty do I have to repair to this stranger on Twitter versus like any one of y'all? Now, you know, people who I've had an actual conversation with, people who I have some sort of like direct line of communication with, I probably have a higher duty to repair that level of a relationship as opposed to some random person on Twitter getting mad at me because they think that I said, because we have some sort of conflict over something.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where it's like, okay, somebody in the chat said like conflict and abuse exist on a continuum. I think the other continuum is your duty to repair. Like how high is your duty to repair if it's, you know, my neighbor versus somebody I see at Kroger, you know, like it probably is different.
And also like that, this idea that you have an equal duty to repair with a random person subtweeting you on Twitter versus a person you've known for like 20 years or something and interacted with on a regular basis is kind of absurd. Like I wouldn't say that. And also I think that like a duty to repair is something that like we should definitely like approach life from a point of view that we should work towards resolving conflict. And that isn't also like an idealistic situation where everyone is on an equal playing field and can actually work towards that goal. It's just like not everyone has the mental capacity to like do that. Or the emotional bandwidth.
Yeah, it was very utopia vibes. Like it didn't feel like actual solutions at times. It was very like, I mean, yes, I agree with you on levels that I would want everyone to be self-aware individuals who try to avoid conflict escalation, but like that's not where we're at.
Well, and that's why I'm like, I do think that this is, I like the ideas, and I think in terms of some of the praxis she's putting forward, I think some of it would be better used in online spaces with people you have less of a duty to repair with, because like I think some of it could just be self-awareness of like, there are times where people talk about like somebody that they don't know on Twitter who's, you know, said something random as being abusive towards them, where it would probably be better for them to have some self-awareness of like, oh, that annoyed me, or like that offended me, but like that's not abusive. And I think that becomes particularly like I see where there are people who have like bigger platforms where there's all of these people who they don't have a personal relationship with, but they can get in a situation where people are perceiving them as being abusive when really what they have is like a conflict of some kind with them of like, I just don't like what you're saying for these reasons. That's more where I'm like, like I think that level of self-awareness would be healthy for online discourse as a whole. Like that I think would be a healthy antidote to some of the like.
And I also feel like a lot, like here's the thing, like I went through this book constantly being like, on one side I was like, ooh, I like this idea, and then on the other side I was like, ooh, not like that. So it was like this continuous stretching out of that spectrum for me. But also I don't think that she like when it comes to like person-to-person interaction, that's when her ideas of resolution, like conflict resolution, work. But if her ideas are not scalable. So when you're talking about like, for example, let's talk about, let's say, an online creator who has like 500,000 like subscribers or followers or whatever, and they get into beef with like a commenter on their channel or something. That content creator does have power over that other person, just in terms of power imbalance. And like in that situation, the person who is getting dogpiled just doesn't have the same tool set to be able to resolve that conflict. It has to come out from, like, in that sense, in that case, the conflict resolution has to come from the person who has the power in the begin with. And are people able or willing to admit that they hurt someone and they should try to resolve the thing? Like adults.
Well, like, I do think another good thing about the book that Mara already brought up is like, there are people in my life who are good people who do constantly, when they are uncomfortable, because they are usually, a lot of my friends are privileged white people, like they will, their instinct is like, call the cops or hand it off to another individual, which in the US centric thing is like, that's not the right step. Like, do I hate that my neighbors ride their motorcycles at 1 a.m. and are super loud college kids? Yes, I dislike my neighbors ferociously, but I would never call the cops on them because they're kids. I don't want anything like on their records, or like some of them are people of color. But I'm the type of person though that doesn't mind conflict. I like don't thrive on it, but I can handle it. If I see them on the street and they're acting a certain way, I am going to use my mom voice on them and I'm going to talk to them. But I recognize that not everyone has that ability or comfort.
I personally get very uncomfortable with the idea of talking with and calling the authorities to handle situations because of possible escalation. The only time I've ever called like anyone was like when there was a literal fire, so I called the fire department. That seems like a safe thing to do.
That's what you should do.
People, but when it comes to like people things, it's like, okay, like, do I know the full scope of the situation? Like, obviously, if there are actual people like getting hurt, like there's a fight going on or something, then yes. But if there's like an argument or something going on, then it's like, is this something that I should involve the actual authorities, or do I just nudge a person who's walking by to come help me resolve that situation myself? You know?
Yeah. Well, like
it's a thing.
Yeah. Me and my neighbors have essentially discussed and like have a pact of like, we don't call the police pretty much at all. We live in a neighborhood like that's very mixed socioeconomically, and even if I am annoyed at something some of my neighbors are doing, I do not have confidence that calling an authority figure would not result in violence that is unwarranted for the level of like conflict I might be having, which is like somebody spray painted my mailbox. Okay, I don't like that. I wish that they hadn't done it. They were probably kids. And I think if I called the police, there is a good chance that they could literally be killed. Like that is something that is on the table, and like that's not worth.
That's not proportional.
That's not proportional. So like we've had that discussion amongst ourselves of like, we are not calling the cops unless like literally somebody is like being hurt in the street, because we just don't have any confidence in their ability to handle that conflict appropriately.
There's also the idea that if, for example, if you take a domestic abuse situation and you call the cops, there is because if you don't know the situation and stuff, there is a high risk that after you call the authorities, it will escalate the domestic abuse situation and the victim will end up getting killed. Yeah. That's the thing that actually provenly statistically.
And that was like a strong part of the book, was the domestic violence, like how sometimes they even just arrest the wrong person.
Yeah. Which, of course, I wanted quick, because I don't know how to answer this one. Since it, wondering if this could have tones of gaslighting. Like, are you asking, like, from the author or talking about gaslighting?
I think that the author has gaslighting.
Okay.
Yeah. Like, I think that here's what I appreciate about this book. I like the language it gives. I think when it applies that language, it often is misfiring on the spectrum of conflict to abuse. Like some of the things that it labels as conflict, I think are abusive.
I would also say that in this, here's the thing. I have thoughts about this because here's my hatred of phone calls comes in. And my approval of written communication is like, yes, because then you have a nice little paper trail that you can follow and what has been said. Whereas if you have to answer someone on the phone or talk to them and then they are later like, I never said that. I never said that. You must have heard me wrong. You must have misunderstood what I meant. So it's like that adamancy about that, how everything should be handled by phone or some other way of like spoken communication. That's where she kind of lost me, because I kept thinking that is ripe and fertile ground for people to get gaslit.
Well, and like, also, I think this is also where it comes down to people are different. And I think it's also like, it's pretty like ableist in some ways, because like not everyone communicates or processes the same way. Like, even if you are talking to someone face to face, they might not even be able to read facial expressions well. Like, that's a thing that's a common thing among people. So assuming that talking face to face assuming that, like, my preference is phone call. That is my preference, because I feel like I am less likely to be misunderstood with the timbre of my voice and my inflection, but that's my comfort level. Versus when I write an email, I stress about it for like an hour or something like that.
Especially as a woman writing a professional email, I'm like, okay, how many jests am I allowed to put in here? I'm allowed one exclamation point to try to communicate. Yes.
I mean, as you know, I am a second language English speaker. So especially when it comes to conversations that I have with my coworkers, because, for example, I have like our operational language is English where I work. So I definitely prefer to have like everything written down, because then I have much more control over my own language, because I like when I'm speaking to you, even right now, I'm constantly sort of translating it from my own weird Finnish brain. So it's like, it's much easier for me to get tangled up with words or use the wrong phrasings and stuff. And that might hurt some people, even if I don't mean to. So that is why written tools are preferred for me.
Yeah, and I think the fact that she brings it as there's only one right way, it rubs me the wrong way, because I think communication can be done successfully in many avenues. I know many people who have very successful texting relationships where they have found their own internal vernacular and understand when someone's off or not, based off emojis being absent or present. Like, people can do that. You know what I mean? Like, if you are in a texting relationship with someone, when they're having a bad day. Like, you that's just a thing that naturally occurs. So I didn't like that.
You only sent me one gift today. What is up? Earlier when you were talking, I forgot. Oh, when you were saying some of your friends are white privileged kids, I thought of one part, and I found it when she was talking about people from a privileged group who, especially usually in an argument or a conflict with someone who is in a different group, said people from privileged groups or who overlap with group society is designed to serve have expectations that their complaints will be heard. Obviously, white people are more likely to have their accusations taken seriously than the undocumented, poor, trans, and people of color, whether the accusations are abuse or conflict. And said the word entitled itself implies an expectation that one can demand something of others and have it to be delivered. And so I was like, that is, yes, because it's like, yes, I am a rich white person. Listen to me. This person is in the wrong. But I just thought of that earlier when you said that the domestic abuse, I feel like some of her
Oh no.
This is the same example she talked about being at the writer's retreat, and that lady was in
so the domestic abuse did have the writer's retreat, and it had the lesbian couple that like got restraining orders on each other. A lot of that happened in the same area.
I mean, the whole writer's retreat, that part rubbed me the wrong way, like, because it was like, okay, so it's a nice piggybacking to another problem that I have, which is like she presents herself as this saintly figure, like, because I like, it would have actually been refreshing if she chose to showcase an example where she was clearly in the wrong and she was clearly doing the complete opposite thing about what she's trying to preach. It would have, one, made her more human and more sympathetic, and also like given her more credibility in her argumentation, because she's willing to admit to her own faults. But the way she cherry picks and chooses these instances and examples from her life are all designed to make her look very
I think
than thou. Saint Schulman, I say.
Well, and I would say it's in terms of like the genre she's going for, that's also like a weakness in that genre. Like if you're going to use your life to explore, it would have been interesting to see you explore an area where you felt like you did not handle conflict well.
Yeah.
Like that would have been an interesting part of seeing your thought process and developing these ideas that you now have about conflict versus abuse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that whole thing is like, I feel like, especially in the writer's retreat situation where she like, okay, I'm getting a little fuzzy on the details. Luckily, Jess has the book on hand, but she basically, I feel like I remember she touches a Black woman without permission and she retaliates. And here's the thing, like, you don't know, like, I don't like people touching me. If someone if someone stranger comes and taps me on the shoulder, my first instinct is to go, like, I completely shut down. And in some situations, like, you don't know the past history and trauma and stuff. So I don't even like why was your first reaction to
when you are with a stranger, if you need them to move out of your way, your first thing is to try something auditory or visual. And if you can't get them, then if it's required, like there are so many steps.
Just, like, one finger to like politely like tap tap tap. At least
and you're like hey.
I mean, like even with friends I meet for the first time in person, they always ask, "Hey, are you a hugger? Can I give you?" Like there are so many things you can do.
Well, like for instance, like touching Black women's hair. So like, Angela, you can maybe give me insight of if this is true outside of the South. In the South, white women touch each other's hair all the time. So like that was something that I had to learn around my Black friends, was that is like not appropriate for me as a white woman to touch a Black woman's hair. Like it's just not.
Why would you touch anybody's hair?
It actually happens, at least where I was from, it happened more when you had curly hair specifically, which typically like, Black women, if it's natural, is curly.
Yeah, exactly. It's a curly thing. And it's like if you have a new haircut, like any of my aunts, their first instinct would be to go like, "Ooh, it looks so good."
I had to train my whole family to stop boinging my hair. Not
with a stranger, but like with a friend. Like it's not uncommon. But like I had to learn that as a boundary. But like,
my school was 70% Black, so like my Black friends would like be complaining about they had to get a perm, so they'd have like these, I think they called them kinkabuds. I don't know if that's what they're called now, but they would be tapping their head and I'd be like, "What are you doing?" And they were explaining and they were like, "Can you tap my head for me?" So I was given permission, but like this is also like a friendship that we've been, nurturing for years.
Yeah, I mean, I come from a culture where the proper social distance is a length of an arm at minimum. So I can't relate.
Well,
like there are photos from Finnish bus stops where people are like standing 2 feet apart at least.
I wish.
What also confuses me, because Sarah's a woman, and like this is where like I have a lot of touch things just based off maybe past anxiety, but there's also the whole like when you're a woman, especially in the US, your body is objectified all the time. And like you go into a bar, you're supposed to be okay if someone like rubs up too close to you. Like you're just supposed to like if you're aggressive about it, that's like a bad thing. Like I do it all the time. I don't want anyone near me that I don't know, but it's like that's not the social norm. So like the fact that she doesn't understand why like another woman maybe doesn't want to be touched unless it's on their terms. Like
she was so confused, and I was like, "But how though?"
Yeah.
And like, wasn't there the weird comparison of like, we love romantic movies and when people do stuff that we would consider stalkerish, but we wouldn't let the stalkerish stuff in our own life. And I'm like, well, I feel like a lot of us who consume romance understand it's a fantasy and actually don't want a lot of those things, but I don't know, like.
Her examples, I was like, could you leave those out, please?
I mean, that whole thing about like a person talking about their G-spot automatically, her projecting her own like, oh, well, she's talking about raunchy things, therefore she must want the raunchy things and is inviting the raunchy things happening to her, was like, I mean, I have a very raunchy sense of humor most of the time, and I am not inviting you to get it on with me, if you know what I'm saying. Like,
I mean, I read alien romances, so people can safely say that like what I read in my romance is not necessarily what I want in real life. So
yeah, I mean, one of my favorite book series lately has been about murderous polyamorous lizard babies having fun times. So like.
Also, what Heather brings up was also what I was thinking out. It's like when you're pregnant, everyone suddenly thinks they can touch your stomach. Ooh. Like I've never been pregnant, but I see, and I'm like, if I ever choose to be pregnant, the first person who tries to touch me is getting like, I'm not a violent person, but I'm
like touching babies in general. Like people who like put your hand. I'm like, this is a tiny human with not a full immune system yet. Like,
I don't know where your hands have been. So. Yeah.
Yeah. And like, I mean, I read a lot of, when I do read romance, there's a lot of alpha characters, which I don't mind in my fictional romance, but do I date an alpha character in my real life?
No. Heather is shocked that you read romance.
It's almost as if people have this ability to separate fiction from reality.
Well, now you're just talking crazy talk because
everything I never knew.
Well, like in the amount of times, like when you like, this is also just with books and fiction, the number of times I have a book tag that's like, what world would you want to be in? I'm like, none of the worlds I read. I'm reading fiction. I don't want to, I like the world I am in. I'm good.
Well, it's like, I don't know what even to say.
That's a fact. Ooh. But like this raises, okay, like let's try to like translate some of her ideas maybe into actual reality of like, okay. So this is a good thing we were just alluding to. Fiction doesn't mean the author approves of it or that you, the reader, approve of it. Mm-hmm. Whereas I often see discourse online talking about people who like XYZ are racist or are this, are that.
Problematic.
So like that's to me an area where we have a difficult, like anything that gets labeled as problematic that people like.
Yeah.
That's an area where I think we have this nebulous place in the conflict versus abuse continuum. Because if we have someone from a marginalized group saying, well, this fiction, I think represents this abusive idea, and I don't think people should read it and whatever, there can be a conflation that people who do read it are participating in abuse. Mm-hmm. Whereas I would argue that is actually a conflict.
Yeah.
So like that's, I don't know what you guys think about that, but like to me, that's kind of where my head went with some of this of like, I think that's where this could be helpful language to separate like things that we all agree are abusive and then how they filter into things that we do and don't like doesn't necessarily mean that we are participating in abuse.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I agree.
I get what you're saying.
And do you mean, so just to clarify, do you mean things like, because I know it comes from all kinds of sides. Someone may say this book has a lot of like racial stereotypes or is racist.
Yeah.
And there's also books like, I'm thinking of like dark romance where people are like, that's not okay. Obviously the people who read it don't want those things in real life. But that's problematic. Do you mean like both or more on like harmful to?
Well, like, I'm trying to think of like a personal example. So like, okay, like misogyny, that's something I can speak on. So like, okay, Twilight or 50, let's go with 50 Shades of Grey because Twilight also has like some racist things.
Twilight's got a lot.
50 Shades of Grey.
Twilight is an all-rounder, ticking all the boxes.
Let's say, yeah, Twilight's special. Let's say that somebody who has been in an abuse, we were talking about domestic violence earlier, has been in an abusive relationship and they view 50 Shades of Grey as romanticizing something that is abusive between two romantic partners. I have seen arguments where people talk about like, well, you were talking about 50 Shades of Grey or you like 50 Shades of Grey. And that means that you are celebrating an abusive culture and you are participating in that abuse. As a woman, when I look at that, I don't agree with that. I could see how other women, to me, that's an area of conflict, basically. Like, I can see arguments on both sides, and I don't think that it's appropriate to conflate somebody who does choose to read or enjoy 50 Shades of Grey. It's not my thing, but like, if people like it, I don't think that that makes them misogynistic necessarily. I don't think it makes them abusive. Now, I'm more open to the conversation of like, is the author potentially, like, are they themselves misogynistic are they themselves participating in abusive culture? Like, I think kind of the transitive maybe that's the way to say it. The transitive property of abusiveness through media is something I see in our online discourse that I think is really, it shuts down conversation because it conflates what I think is legitimate conflict into something that's like abusive.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna jump from your point because I feel like it also like when you're saying that someone who has experienced that stuff can look at it and be like, okay, this is harming me, and therefore they may feel offensive and in engaging other people who are enjoying the thing. But the thing is that there are also people who have experienced the thing who are using those kinds of media to safely re-engage with the idea and trying to explore their own trauma. So it's a very difficult and nuanced topic because people as a whole are not a monolith.
Yeah.
So like everyone has different tolerances in terms of like how they engage. Well, like, for example, when it comes to like let's say essay in books, like I read something like Berserk, which is like from the first page of the first volume, it is like it lets you know that it's gonna be grimdark as all hell. So I have I have bigger tolerance for the grim aspects in that series because I know from the get-go, okay, this is what I'm getting into. Whereas if a book has a certain tone all throughout, and then suddenly there's a scene that happens, and I'm like, oh, wait. So I feel like there's that aspect that you're kind of cheated into reading or exploring that when it wasn't sort of, you weren't warned about it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So it's there's different levels of tolerance.
Well, and like what you were saying a little earlier, it's like and like what Mara's saying, the transitive property, you have the author creating the work and whatever unconscious biases or conscious biases that they are putting into the work. And then you have the reader consuming the work, bringing all of their stuff, and they might see something that's racist and think, oh, they think the author's saying this racist thing is bad, but the author might have been, like interpretation is not binary in all reading situations. Like, there are some cases where it's like, no, this is actually like the most misogynistic like thing, and it really feels like the author is promoting it. But sometimes it's messy, and some of the best works are messy.
Yeah.
So I don't know, like it's hard because art's meant to be interpreted. At least that's how I like to do it.
I think that there's, I was just gonna say, I do think that there is a propensity in online bookish spaces to not allow there to be interpretation. Mm-hmm. This book has problematic element X. Therefore, this book is bad. People who read it are bad. People who promote it are bad. And that's where I feel like there's a real, like that's where language like what Schulman's introducing, I think could be very helpful to talk through. Okay. Yeah. There's a disagreement about the interpretation of this book and if it should exist in some cases, if it should be read, etc. That's a conflict we can work through without having to accuse each other of being abusive for even reading or consuming that media.
Yeah.
Also, I think like Schulman also talks about like in her chapter about family, she also she talks a lot about family, but she also talks about in groups and group think. Essentially, like the idea that a group needs to be a consistent whole where no alternative opinions are allowed to be had because it threatens the it threatens the group. Yeah, essentially. So people have to be checked and kept in place. And I have definitely felt some of that in some communities that I have been a part of. Like it happens in ways like where there is like gatekeeping and hazing, where you are trying to get into certain groups, and this happens I would say that gaming is probably one of the bigger ones, bigger communities, but honestly, it happens in every single community. Like sewing community, for God's sake.
Yeah.
It's also like that.
I also think when you suddenly label someone as, if you like X, you are bad because of what's in the book, like you're already putting someone on the defensive. So that's like the opposite of trying to maybe inform them. Like, okay, when I read Twilight in high school, regardless of my community being more diverse than the average person, I missed all of the racism in it. I missed all of the misogyny. I wasn't reading it critically. I still had a fun time because it was a fast read, but I wasn't reading it with those lenses, and I was uninformed of a lot of these things. Like my brain was probably being like, of course someone in the world who's an adult producing media checked all of their boxes and that this representation isn't bad. You know, like I wasn't a critical reader, but like I also would like to think I'm a person who has learned and grown. But if someone is just like, you read this, you're bad, that doesn't give me that space. Like, you know, it immediately takes that away from me and takes away all of my motivation.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's what happens.
I mean, and it also like this whole idea that you are stagnant in your growth and that the person who you were 10 years ago is the same person that you are today.
Yeah.
Like it basically like these sorts of ideas where you are one thing is kind of like putting you inside a box and not letting you, like refusing to look at evidence that you are a more complex person, you know?
And it's kind of what I actually dislike a lot in, like, this is a very US-centric education system, is like when you're in a classroom, if you speak up, you're supposed to be correct. If you're wrong, normally you're made fun of or the teacher talks down to you. Like, it's not, being wrong is like everyone's least favorite thing to do because of a lot of school districts and how they like drill it into you. So like if you're told you missed a thing or you liked a thing that was bad, like instead of like teaching them or being like, it's okay that you didn't know, it's okay that you missed this thing, instead of the instant is reinforcing this whole, it's bad that you were unknowledgeable about this, which who's knowledgeable about everything? And they're, you know, like I don't, that's what I hate.
What were you going to say?
Oh, that was just making me think of the group shunning, and I was trying to find that exact part. And I can't find that, but that just made me think of it because it usually is somebody starts something about this book has this, and then it's like everyone's like, yes. If we're speaking about Twitter, it's quote tweet and like,
I mean,
you read this book then, and on. But I have a question. So we're talking, if we're using the Twilight, no wait, we use 50 Shades of Grey example
to isolate the issue. Really, only have to deal with misogyny and not.
Do you think this same idea would also apply with like the sins of the author that we've talked about before? And obviously there's varying degrees of that, but like with something like, I hate continuously bringing this up, but the thing with TJ Klune and House in the Cerulean Sea, and I've seen tweets like, if you read TJ Klune, then you hate indigenous people, like that equating. And so, I mean, in some things, I just don't, even if, let's say you already have purchased a piece of media, find out the author is garbage and really harmful, and you know, but you still, does reading that equal you being the same as that author? I feel like that kind of can relate here because some people put that on people.
And I don't know what to do with that because I just feel like it's again, to me, this is where her argument has a lot of helpful illumination because that is a flattening of all nuance. Yes. To act like TJ Klune, and it's hard because I know I am not a part of either of the communities I'm about to represent, so I want to disclaim that. But to act like TJ Klune is in the same ballpark as J.K. Rowling or Orson Scott Card, I think is a disingenuous argument, and it makes it hard to really take that seriously because to me there is a difference between saying like, this is somebody who has consistently and loudly supported like human being against some basic human rights, like somebody who's consistently done that versus somebody who I think clearly made a misstep, and one that I don't disagree was hurtful to people. Like, clearly it was, but that's different than like a pattern of an author having genuinely, I think, fairly characterized abusive behavior.
It's like there's the pattern of behavior, but also I think with TJ Klune, it is important to acknowledge the thing. Like, and okay, that, you know, maybe like like for example, because when I read the book, I obviously myself am also not part of any indigenous group, but like this, like when I read the book, I personally like I just viewed it as a sort of like, you know, child institution type of thing, like boarding schools and like abusive, like orphanage situation. And I felt that when I read the interview afterwards, when people brought it up, I thought that, okay, well, that's like not very tactful, and that's possibly like, whose stories are these to tell, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But I think more important here is the going forward. How is TJ Klune going to present his works going forward? Is he going to learn from this, or is this going to be an instance in a pattern of behavior for the future? Whereas in comparison, let's say someone like Cixin Liu, who wrote The Three-Body Problem and who has come out advocating the Uyghur genocide.
Yes.
So like that's a person who is like actively has said something and actively promotes and agrees with the CCP. So it's like these two things are similar in that they are like, you know, people like having abusive situations towards indigenous people, but they are like apples and oranges in terms of scope and like effect, essentially, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So it's like I would look at future behavior and like is there growth? Is there I don't want to use the word repentance. What's an alternative to repentance? Like, you know, self-reflection.
Yeah.
The thing.
Yeah.
And I mean,
demonstrating that you've internalized a lesson or internalized growth. Yeah.
well, and I think like
where you did something wrong.
Yeah, like, and this is a case where, like, I mean, I think when he was getting his idea, he did what a lot of fantasy authors do. They take from a traumatic point in history and go off it. There are plenty of authors who are not Jewish who use the Holocaust as their inspiration. You know, like, I'm not saying this is a good practice, but it's a fairly common one in the fantasy genre to take traumatic historical points and then use that as an inspiration point. Now, maybe that's a larger conversation that needs to be had in fantasy when people are not part of those groups. But I feel like when he made that decision, there wasn't like a whole conversation that he could have even looked at to be like, this is a huge red flag moment. And now he knows. So now, like you said, now we can give him the chance to learn and not co-opt other people's stories. Because like you said, it is important that, you know, you shouldn't become super popular off somebody else's historical trauma. Sort of.
I feel like in terms of like in terms of us whites, there is this sort of like when something is history, it's everybody's ball game sort of thing. Like when it's history, it belongs to everyone. Whereas like and there seems to be this loss of understanding, especially like if there are people who are still living who have actually experienced that history. Let's say, for example, things like sorry, my English is failing me. The indigenous children boarding schools, that thing.
Yeah.
And also like civil rights movement. Like some people look at that and they're like, oh, that's history. That's far removed.
And it's like
But
30
for
years
other
ago.
people, it's like, well, I and my grandmother lived through that shit, so you know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Jess, what do you think as the resident
Yes.
mentor, our investigative reporter of
I would like to, I feel like I get torn, especially every situation just has to be individual. And I think that's something, especially in the book community, that people tend to just group the sins of an author all on the same level, where it's like this person responded to a reader rude on Twitter versus this person was charged with sexual assault. They're very different things. And I don't like and there's been a lot of conversation about this recently. I don't like how people like attack people if they watch someone's video and they have a book on their shelf from an author that's been deemed problematic. I'm like, that's not, again, that's not helping. You're making them become defensive because you're going at them. But then things with, especially like, particularly with the TJ Klune, like I want to talk to Indigenous creators about it, but I also don't want to be like, I don't know, because about residential schools, which is very, it's going on.
What's the word?
I want it to be like a trauma thing, like, hey, do this emotional work with me. Because, I've just seen tweets and I want to acknowledge that the hurt they feel, and I understand. I just don't want, I guess my opinion is not really valid because I'm not Indigenous. I just don't feel like, since I like the book, I don't care about the Indigenous communities, and I want to talk. I just really I would love to get feedback on that particular situation without like it being
yeah.
Them. I don't know if it makes sense.
No, that does, and I think what you're introducing is something because I did a live stream kind of talking about like the ethics of inspiration, and I was trying to like talk through some of these things because like I think. What's difficult is that we do have this kind of line or like official party line that I think is the right position to take, but the way it gets applied, I think is like pragmatically difficult, which is only people in this marginalized group get to have an opinion about something, which is somewhat true. But the reality is like, if you've never heard, like if we're talking about TJ Klune, if you've never heard of The House in the Cerulean Sea before, you don't have to take a stance either way because it wasn't even on your radar. You're not even thinking about it. But if it's a book that you are thinking about reading and you are a non-Indigenous person, if you become aware of this item, you end up having to have an opinion about it because you either are going to read it or you are not. And if that's factoring into your decision. So it's like, I think that's where, again, like this language of conflict, I think could be helpful. Because it's like there's going to be conflict of people making a decision to read it or to not, and to talk about it or to not. And like, can we engage with conflict on that, saying like some people are not going to be happy that I have read and liked this book, and can I have a conversation about that with them rather than saying like, I have decided to read this book and anybody who disagrees with me is wrong and blah, 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 blah. Or I have decided not to read this book and anybody who chooses to read it is wrong. Like, is there space for us to say like, hey, I'm a non-Indigenous person. This is the decision I have made. I am aware of the questions or ethics around this. And here's where I'm coming from. Could we have a conversation about this?
Yeah.
I would also argue that there is this idea like when conflict is organic versus when it is manufactured, because I feel like the house under the house in the Cerulean Sea, Jesus, like it was popular whole of last year. The friggin' interview was made like before the book was published. Yet it only started gaining traction when someone who had sat on this interview for a bit of time started posting about it. Whereas like, I also like, and I understand that like Indigenous creators who probably don't have a larger, don't have as large a reach, were trying to bring it into attention and stuff and weren't getting their voice heard. But I just feel like there's some calculation when someone looks at that thing and decides that, okay, I'm gonna stir the pot. And it's disingenuous to me. It feels like it is less about bringing awareness to the situation and more about how can I be the center of attention now by bringing this thing into other people's, like it just reeks of performative.
And what Mara was bringing up though, like with the language of the book, I think is right, because like, and oddly, it's about stuff that I didn't even agree with the author, but made me think of is like the Indigenous community, and we all agree this, have a right to be angry about the appropriation of their trauma to do this thing, and they're allowed to be angry. But, and so they can express that, and we should have to figure out how to take that. And I think that's where we have the problem, right? Is then some people, like, I think we all are doing a lot of internal reflection, but some people are like, I am being told now I'm a bad person. and then it goes straight into that like abuse category. When I would, they're not a monolith. I don't think all Indigenous creators or readers think you're a bad person if you read The House in the Cerulean Sea. Most of them are probably like, of course our trauma was taken. This is not the first time or the last time, because I read a contemporary called There, and I think that was a contemporary that really brought to my mind that a lot of the frustration that happens is less about like there's still a lot of wrongs happening, it's all horrible how they're treated, but it's more the silence. It's more us never paying attention to them. And then of course, when their story is then becomes this mega popular book that no one even notices, and their own stories just we're losing women to theft and rape all the time and no one's paying attention, it's like I can sense their frustration and it's warranted. And then we as the people who aren't in that conflict need to figure it out. And it's very nuanced, like what Mara was saying. Like and I hate the pot stirrers. Like there are people who do that, but then just because they stirred the pot, it doesn't mean that what was stirred up isn't relevant, right?
Exactly. And it's like, I have to be comfortable saying that I'm going to make this, especially somebody with a platform, I'm going to make decisions about what I do and don't read that people are going to disagree with. Yes. They are. And like, I think Heather actually was saying this earlier. I think we have this idea of like, if anybody ever questions our judgment, it's very difficult for us to not become defensive and say like, you're calling me a bad person. Yeah. And sometimes people are, because there are people who go that far. But a lot of times people are just like, I don't like that you did that. And like, do we have space to just say like, yeah, sometimes you make decisions and not everybody likes them. And like, you can try to be as respectful and, whatever about decisions you make as you possibly can. And you should be. I think that's part of having a platform, is like being responsible about that. But at the end of the day, like if I feel like I can look myself in the mirror and say like, I know why I'm making this decision and I'm comfortable with people disagreeing with me about it, that doesn't mean people are being abusive to me. They can cross that line if they start like, whatever. But most of the time it's just like somebody has a conflict with me and I just have to be okay with that.
Yeah.
Also like here's the thing, like when it comes to like conflict turning into abuse, there was the situation, for example, with Isabel Fall, where people had legitimate criticisms about her work, which then sort of escalated into people dogpiling and abusing her out of online spaces. So it's like there can be a sort of breaking point where a situation that started out as conflict that could have been resolved and could have been talked about gets escalated into an abusive situation because other people come in with bad intent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, well said. I had a question or something I tabbed and just wrote down. Do y'all have any specific opinions on what she was saying about trigger warnings? Because I know that's also a conversation.
Okay, so I have very specific opinions of, like as a person with mental health and mental illness situations. Like I understand the importance and I understand the need for trigger warnings, but I would say that I am very much against this idea of basically pathologizing spaces. And like personally, I prefer to term content warning instead of trigger warning, because a trigger is a very specific thing and it is a pathological thing. So
and is like, hey, you may or may not want to read this. But just can you remind us of what she says? Because I don't remember.
Yeah. So she was saying in like, because she was especially talking in an educational setting. And she said, being reminded that one was once in danger has to be different from whether or not one is currently in danger. Confusing the two is a situation that quickly becomes destructive. Being conscious about one's own traumatized past experiences and how they manifest into current traumatized behavior can be a force for awareness of one's own reactions, not a means of justifying the repression of information. And so she was talking about a situation where some participants in a round table, she said, were so traumatized that they were unable to have this conversation. So any idea they didn't agree with or that they felt maybe was, that they would take as a trigger, maybe. She said they experienced as assaults. Instead of addressing the content of the idea, they would respond with their autobiographies of sexual assault and violence. So, because she was talking about not wanting to basically hinder or like hide any information because it could be triggering to people, is kind of what I took that as. And she had like an example of a student who said she was cruel because of certain things that were like in a reading or a discussion that they had. And so I know I saw some discussion of that in the Discord. Some people were talking about the trigger warnings, and we had just talked about that a couple weeks ago about with like story graph. So I was just like,
I think about like, this is another situation where it's a very difficult, complex, and nuanced topic. And also, like, whilst I am of the mind that I always, for example, when I do reviews, I always have a section where I include content warnings and stuff that I find. But like, this idea is essentially like, in the book, she also complains that she won't have trigger warnings in her classroom settings and stuff like that. Like, that's another thing that she said. And on the one hand, I am sort of like upset at this offensiveness to taking other people's limitations or comfort into account. But on the other hand, because it is such a varied thing, like no one person has the same experiences, and therefore no one person has the same triggers to things, So you actually are unable to take every single person 100% into account in a classroom setting. And I think that, like, how she could approach that is that she would have a course outline laid out that says that these are the books we are going to discuss, these are the topics that these books handle, come at your own discretion, like no warnings required. Like, it's not rocket science in a sense.
Yeah, like, and I felt like if her goal was that people need to sometimes engage in safe environments with topics that make them feel unsafe, telling someone what those topics are beforehand is not detrimental to meeting that goal.
Yeah.
Like, if I'm not one, but if I was a rape victim and like there's going to be sexual assault being discussed, being told that ahead of time can help me do whatever I need to do mental health wise to be able to experience that content, versus if I'm just hit it in the face.
I mean, easy example. I need you to tell me 3 weeks in advance if you want to meet me at a cafe or something, so that I can mentally prepare for going outside, So it's similar to that, It's like basic courtesy in most cases.
Yeah,
and I think, so in the example of rape, like, I've experienced sexual assault, and I have read things that I would describe as genuinely triggering to me, right? Like something that really ruined my day. Like, is that maybe a way to talk about it? But I don't always know when that's going to happen. And I've read plenty of things that didn't do that. So like, I don't think, I take her point of like, if you expect to go through life never being triggered by anything, like, you are setting yourself up basically to be disappointed, because like life is triggering. Hello, like the news is triggering. But I also think that acting like you can't, that it's somehow like, it kind of felt sort of like catering to like these special snowflakes, or like these millennials or Gen Z or whatever, who just need everything spoon fed to them. I just think that that's like kind of disingenuous, because like most people who have actual triggers are not like, they're not going through life wanting to inconvenience you. Like it's not, I guess my problem with that mindset is it kind of centers the person who needs to be courteous rather than the person who needs the courtesy. Like I need you to just be aware that like there are other, it's like it's a politeness thing to me.
Yeah, and I know my sibling had to go through a class and they kept just trying to tell their teacher they had one trigger and they knew it might come up, and it's like, it's okay if it comes up in class. I just personally need to know beforehand. And the teacher just refused, would never warn them. And I'm like, that's just, no one's like, this isn't even Rhea's example of you need to somehow compile the vast list of triggers. This is like an individual in your like 30-person class just asking for this courtesy. And like, I mean, I don't understand.
It's more like you taking a stance of just being, because she said, I have a no censorship rule. Like, and it's just, it doesn't have to be, especially if it's like one person. It's like you're just trying to be an asshole. Like you just want to be like, no.
I mean, there's this also like this idea that like a thing that I experienced once was where a former classmate of mine said something really offensive, like in more ways than one, like in like a general sense, like very offensive thing to me. And I asked them to apologize to me. And they refused flat out to apologize. And the thing that they said was that I am not responsible for your reaction to what I said. And I'm like, that seemed like when I read that section, that whole experience kind of came back to me, because I feel like that's the sort of general, like, I'm not responsible for how you react. No, but you are responsible for how you choose to frame your own words and how you choose to like approach me, you know? So like,
and you even followed Sarah's advice and look what it got you.
Yeah. Well, and then this comment that says at some point there's some narcissism in people who are triggered. I think that there is something to that. I do think that there are some people who are kind of performative in their I think that this is sort of like the minority casting a bad rap on the majority of people. There are some people who I think do revel in and kind of owning a victimhood identity. I think that that's not untrue. I feel like I've seen that in online spaces. I don't think that that's untrue, but I think it's unkind to assume that that's how most people who have had those experiences are. Like most people who have had experiences where they have been made a victim don't enjoy that and don't revel in it. It's just it's a fact of history, and part of interacting with them is being respectful of that. And you shouldn't punish that majority of people for the small percentage who, I agree, seem to take some enjoyment in being able to kind of like hold their victim status over the heads of other people. Like I've seen that, but I just think that it's not fair to think that's the majority of people.
There's always like,
there's
differences of opinion. There's differences of how we view the world, how we act. And it's I think it is disingenuous and dishonest to sort of pin the blame of or pin the blame and hold the responsibility of a minority inside a group over the whole group, you know?
Exactly. Yeah.
And like for example, this idea, like even if there is like, even if there are people who have like sense of like victimhood, like I think like I can empathize with this idea that, for example, people who talk about their mental health status and stuff like that, at some point, especially if you have lived a life where you have been, for example, mentally ill longer than you have been mentally healthy, it becomes your safe state to be. And going outside of that state is like it becomes difficult and it becomes dangerous to you. So you kind of like fall back to a sense of routine and sense of comfort, even though that may not be healthy, you know? And that is not necessarily evil or something that you even do intentionally. Like there may be some people who do, but I wouldn't assume that is the way most people operate in their daily lives.
Yeah, have you guys seen Gabby Hanna in her whole craziness over the last couple of months?
I have heard about it, but I haven't actively.
She basically, so apparently she was diagnosed with ADHD in the last year or so, which good for her, because I'm sure that was like a helpful diagnosis, and it seems like that's been helpful for her to get, you know, be able to make accommodations for herself and ask for what she needs from other people. But she has been making this series of YouTube, like essentially airing all of her YouTube drama. And like over and over again, she's like, I have ADHD. I have it. And she basically is using it as a cudgel of like, you cannot hold me responsible for any of my bad behavior because I have ADHD. And like so many people have been coming out saying like, I have ADHD. And like, I don't, you know, tell people I'm not a rapist or whatever.
Why does this remind me of Kanye West and bipolar? Isn't that something that was happening?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, to me, that's kind of what I'm thinking of. Like, yes, are there the Gabby Handos of the world who's going to take like a legitimate medical diagnosis and use it as an excuse for every bad behavior she's ever had? Yes, there are people who are like that, and they're very attention grabbing. But then there are the thousands and thousands of people who have ADHD who are able to not be absolute monsters to everybody in their life. You know,
the average person, since most of us aren't even diagnosed with it and just function.
Probably. Exactly. I put this up here because someone asked what happens when you're triggered. It's never happened to me either, so I don't have any.
For me, it happens very rarely, and honestly, trigger warnings don't help me personally, because I can read something that has some content and I'm completely detached, and other times it completely. Yeah. And for me, it specifically spirals me into depression, anxiety with higher symptoms, like the heart rate that accelerates, and I normally don't have those, but that's what happens to me.
Me too. It feels kind of like fight or flight.
Yeah.
It's that kind of like adrenaline of just like, I feel cornered and like.
And it makes it really hard to focus and things. So like, say in a classroom setting, if like for me, one of my stuff is like discussing like drug addiction and familial domestic abuse and stuff like that, I would want to make sure that I had plans for after or that class to do self-care. Like, it's not like it would really maybe help me in class, because I can't tell in class whether it would trigger me or not. But I can make sure after class, maybe I have one of my favorite food things ready, or yoga, something to look forward to try and help rein in my anxiety with however I cope. So that's why I think it would be helpful. Not that it's going to solve anything. It's just, you know, self-care.
For me, it's like, for example, trigger warnings for me personally aren't always the most helpful, because I don't necessarily even have to consume any media or do anything to have an episode, because sometimes I just sort of wander in my mind. I think about a situation that happened to me, let's say 5 years ago, and then that spirals me into a state where I get shortness of breath and I can't focus, and I start to lose my train of thought and stuff. So sort of like having that memory flashback in itself can cause a trigger. So it's like, it depends so much on the person, and it's just case by case basis. That's why mental health stuff is so hard to treat, because it's so individual.
Yeah, and that's where like I land on the whole like err on the side of respect and courtesy, because like that takes usually very little extra effort.
Yeah,
like
or even just like when it comes to book stuff, like dubcon in romance, I always put that as a content warning if I notice it. Not even because I think it could be truly triggering for someone, but also some people just don't want to read that. Yeah. And like, that's okay. And if it's not clear from the back of the book that might be a part of it, like, I think it's fair for you to say like, I just don't want to read that.
Yeah.
Yes.
And like, I mean, when you have just like personal friends, like you wouldn't, if you knew someone in your life recently had a miscarriage and you read this book that had a miscarriage, you would probably warn them before recommending it to them. That's like a personal thing, right? And like that may or may not trigger them, but it's that type of thing where you're like, you can't do that with like, if you have a content platform, that's hard to do, you know, individual basis. But when you have like a friend, you do that courtesy without even thinking about it probably. So like, I don't know.
You know,
I just don't understand the whole debate of like being courteous to people. It it's like the same thing with the pronoun debate, like whether or not if someone's on the cis binary and they can't understand, I'm like, you don't have to understand. No one's asking you to understand. We're just asking respect.
So many things in this life, I'm just like, this is basic neighborliness / like being polite. Like, I know we don't need to get in this whole thing, but the vaccine thing drives me crazy because I'm just like, this is literally just a basic, like, I am being neighborly toward, or the masks or any of that. It's like, this is literally just 101. Like, my actions affect other people. Yeah. So like I should think about that. Like I shouldn't run a red light, not just because like I don't want to get hurt, because I want to hurt someone else. Like this is just very
it just seems so simple, Mara.
It seems so simple, and yet it seems apparently it is very complicated. I don't know.
Yeah, I just I keep reading about
TikTok
people.
keeps serving this to me. So
no, I mean, but that's like if you want to talk about things that trigger me, that's one of them. If I let myself spiral too much on Twitter and like look up too much about what people are and are not doing with COVID, I get.
Yeah, I mean, I would do anything to have my second jab any day now. You know, as an immunocompromised person, I don't trust any of the others, but I can trust myself to get jabbed.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I'm immunocompromised, and my father was immunocompromised and passed away from the flu because somebody decided to just cough all over him. Yeah. So I mean, like, I'm just sitting here like, your actions don't just affect you.
Yeah, like, I mean, I'm lucky enough to live in a state with like 75% vaccination rate. We still have breakout cases. So they told me wear a mask again. Fine. Do I like wearing a mask in 95-degree heat? No.
It's annoying, but it's not going to kill you, and it's not. Right? Sorry, I did.
Again, it's again, like you said, basic respect, things you would learn on Sesame Street. Like, I don't know what's going on.
It's like, you know what? Big Bird taught this to you when you were 3, and we have all forgotten.
I mean, you think that we would learn things from, let's say, Asia, where mask wearing has been a cultural practice for literal decades, and you notice how when seasonal flus and stuff come in, they don't have as many cases. I wonder why.
Also, can I just say I've loved not having a cold for the last 18 months. Like.
Yeah. Also, during the cold, like when it's cold, I was like, because I would walk Nigel and I'd be like, oh, this is actually.
The mask is so warm. It's so nice.
Yeah.
The summer, it's annoying, but the winter.
Yeah, I think I'm going to keep wearing masks probably in the winter for the rest of my life because it keeps my face warm and I really like not having a cold. It's great.
Transportation.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have a choice for the foreseeable future because I live in a place that's like you have never not been allowed to wear your mask on the bus since this started, and you have to wear a mask at work. Like we never lifted that in my work.
I'm in Tennessee, so if you guys have seen that viral video, that was literally the county south of me. I'm surrounded.
Tennessee was the place I was supposed to go. I was supposed to go to Nashville in May of 2020. That's what, everyone has their thing COVID took away from them. Yes. It took away Nashville's food.
Was it
I was supposed to go to New Zealand.
Oh, that's a bummer.
I'm still like, when I even think about New Zealand, I still get upset, like viscerally upset. It hurts me.
Jess, have you seen that county school board meeting where people like were outside, like beating up somebody's car because of the mask mandate discussion or whatever? That's Williamson County, which is the county south of Nashville. It's the richest county in Tennessee. And it is, I don't have really many nice things to say about it, but.
Why is it always the richest places that have the most amount of rules?
It's because we have too much time to think about these things, man. I don't know.
There's so many videos of people, because I watched one with a lady who was yelling that they're coming for the children and something, and Trump's the real president. I don't know. There's just too many videos of too many areas where people are going against.
Jess, yesterday was his reinstatement day, so.
What?
That was the latest conspiracy. Well, I don't know if you guys have followed this. Again, TikTok keeps me up to date on this.
I value my mental health a little bit more than this, but update me.
It's very entertaining if you have the right lens on it. It's very entertaining. So pretty much like the Q followers are like people who think Trump is still president, of which there's a shocking number. it's pretty depressing. Whatever. They keep having like this goalpost moving of like, okay, first it was going to be like February something or other where he was going to get reinstated and essentially come out as the true president all along. Then it was in March. Then it was in April. Then I forget who said it, but recently the most recent one was August 13th, because it was Friday the 13th. And it didn't happen. So like there was a bunch of really sad years on TikTok, and I was
copium. The level of copium on these people.
I don't know. It's anyway. Sorry, I'm sorry. I introduced this entire line of.
It's relevant.
I mean, that's literally a thing. People think they're being abused by being asked to wear a mask, exactly. And that's very relevant.
They think they're being abused by having to
go into the grocery store. But so question, or not question, but since we're getting close to the 2-hour mark, do you have any final thoughts? I think we've had a really good discussion. Mm-hmm. I think that I'll go first. That if her point was to inspire conversation and to think on things, I think that worked. We didn't all agree, love her delivery and some of her examples I could have done without Miss Sarah. But I think, the discussion has been great, and I hope that some more people, I don't know, this obviously doesn't reach a lot of people, but I wish that more people had the mental capacity to, and then also wanted to be able to take more time to have more conversations to hash out conflict instead of immediately hopping to abuse. But we've got a long way to go before the majority of people are even at a place to be able to. So I don't know. I still, maybe I didn't love it, or not the audiobook. I'm glad I read it. Yeah. That's all I got.
I think I'm one of the few people who didn't have a negative response to the audiobook. I didn't have an overly positive response. I was like, oh, this is like a podcast. All right, let's go for 4 hours or whatever it was. Not all in one sitting. I can't do that. My final thoughts. I mean, I did know it would lead to great discussion, and that was what made it worth it. I think normally if I were to rate something 2.5 stars, that's normally more of a negative thing. Here, it was definitely more of this was not a waste of my time. It was just fine, and I'm excited that it did lead to discussion. So it's probably the most positive 2.5 star I've ever given a book, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Also, I don't rate a lot of nonfiction, so it's weird. Nonfiction is a different rating, because I don't enjoy nonfiction. That's not why I read it. And I don't know. I kind of, like you said, Jess, I was hoping that even if it didn't lead to more concrete examples of how to handle conflict, instead of just saying this is conflict, this is abuse, which is mostly what the story's doing. And I guess her examples are meant to be do what I do, but obviously that didn't really resonate with a lot of us. I kind of wish the examples, the good examples were there, and then all the bad examples were removed. If that makes sense, because I feel then it's a more recommendable piece of nonfiction to be look, this is a good and bad examples of how to interact with your space to start trying to be the type of person that doesn't become overly defensive. But I don't know if you can really use this nonfiction in that way. It can be used like this, where we really parse it out. But that's, I guess, where I land on it.
It's a great book club book, like you said, Mara. It's definitely something to read with people and talk about. Not I don't think if I had read this myself, I would get as much out of it, because I had questions when I finished it, and I'm glad we were able to chat about it. Yeah, for example, I'm glad I know where it lands in philosophy nonfiction sort of space.
Yeah, and maybe to avoid these kinds of
no, that's not my place. Although I think I read one recently that I didn't mind. It was Disfigured, Disability and Fairy Tale, which isn't
I really want to read that. I really love that book.
That one has a lot of it does a lot what this book does in terms of its structure, but in a better way. I liked her examples more. I do think some people it's a good intro work.
But here's the thing: she brought in actual people. Instead of regurgitating what other people said, she actually interviewed people so that they could say their own piece instead of her interpreting what they were meaning.
Yeah, you still get a lot of her stuff, but she has cerebral palsy, so
yeah.
it was a good, like I said, similar to this, but I give that more of like a 3.75 or 4 if I'm rating like this paper, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I really like that book. In terms of like this, I feel like now, like I was hopping in and off the Discord discussion and like following what people were saying and stuff. So I definitely think that this book caused a ruckus, and people were really like engaging with it, which like I think it's fantastic, because even if people like completely hate it and disagree with it, they were still willing to have a discussion, which is something that I think the book actually succeeds at then, even though it isn't perfect and it completely misses the mark in some aspects. Mm-hmm. But I will say I am very excited to read more on this sort of topic from other authors now. Yeah. Like I want to see what other kinds of books there are on this similar topic. Like
me too.
It's especially more focused on like the social media aspect of stuff, because that's what I'm more familiar with myself.
Yeah, I think I tend to I'm definitely a glass half full kind of gal. So I think when I end a book, I tend to like reflect on the things that I liked about it more than not, unless it just like really gets me heated, and then, you know, whatever. So like when I think about this book, I was looking at what like the notes I made. The biggest thing that like I take away are some of the ideas in the book. And I think I tend to forget a lot of the examples, because like pretty quickly I was like, okay, I don't know that I love your examples. So I'll get through those to find the ideas. I do think that this is a book, actually, like it kind of embodies some of the ideas we were talking about, because I think it's a good example of like, you can have conflict over this book, because I think that there is a lot to critique within it, but it is a good book for being, it is a thought-provoking book. And for that's why I give it 4 stars, because I think it did make me think about it and get mad at it at certain points and agree with it at certain points. So I don't know, like the biggest takeaway I had was this idea of not overstating harm. I think that like is a really helpful language. And then where is the quote that I wrote down that I really liked? When they need to be abused, the truth doesn't matter. I thought that was a really helpful thing to keep in mind. Like when I'm disagreeing with someone, of like, am I really mad about what they said, or is it that I want them to be punished in some way? And therefore, like I can bend what they said to fit the narrative I've kind of already come up with that they need to be abused.
And also like this idea that, is this something that, like, is this person really causing me harm, or am I projecting something internal in myself onto what this person said?
Yeah. So I haven't found another book on this topic, but I'll try to remember. I've heard a lot of podcasts kind of going around this topic. I was listening to one the other day with Chris Hayes, where he was talking about like the deplorable versus the debatable, which I thought was kind of another way to talk about the same idea. I think it's something people are more and more talking about in the context of quote unquote cancel culture. Yeah. I think there's more like thought being generated about like what are the nuances of passionate disagreement. But anyway, all that to say, I hope people aren't mad that you picked this, Jess. Like, no,
I think don't like after this live stream, we will all just dogpile on Mara for liking this book.
Exactly.
That's just really cool thesis point.
I mean, I didn't blame Mara. I remember the wrap up. She talked about it, and I was like, I don't know why Jess chose it, but okay, here we go.
Yeah, same. I was like, oh, okay, well, yeah. But I think that it's I actually think that it was a very, very fine first pick for a book club, because the book is so sort of subversive.
Good job.
Yeah. And I mean, like, we've never run out of things to say. You're just the one who wants to get on with your day, or night.
Or your night. You want to go to bed. It's like 10 o'clock your time.
I mean, it's 11 p.m. In my time, so I win the time zone crunch.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, I knew
That is
exactly
my
what this
fault.
book would be like based on what Mara's wrap-up said, and I was not disappointed. I was just like, yeah.
Yeah.
I
I mean, would it be as interesting if we all were like singing its praises? I don't know. Maybe. But it did have. Oh, go ahead. What were you gonna say?
Well, I was just conflict is always more fun to talk about.
That's true.
People love the same with negativity always. Like people always say, I don't like when we are negative, and then YouTube analytics just show the nice bell curve.
Yeah.
Well, and like Mara alluded to, like this book, there were a lot of times where like, yes, I just did not like her examples, but sometimes I felt called out, and my internal response was, stop that. Don't do that, you know, and like, you know, and then trying to like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
yes, no, but I was still like, I don't want to use the phone, Sarah. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. I'm still a millennial and therefore hate the phone. Okay.
Yes.
Like Sarah, I've been avoiding using the phone for 20 years. The moment I discovered that you can have a do not disturb mode on your cell phone, my life was set.
Truly iconic. On that, this is so random, but I saw a tweet. It was like, people who put their phones on do not disturb, y'all just don't care about nobody. You're like, nope, because they're like, if you're dying and your house is on fire, call somebody else. I'm asleep.
Also,
my phone has been on do not disturb since March 2020. That's what the pandemic did to me. It made me put my phone on do not disturb. I just couldn't anymore.
My phone has been on do not disturb for the past 4 years because you can customize it to allow your saved and contacts to pass through. So people who I actually want to call me can still call me if need be. But also I have trained my closest associations to know to text me or, you know, do something else or call my partner because he doesn't mind to be called. Weird.
Yeah, what is the next book? I saw that there was a tie. Last time I saw there was a tie.
Let me
Cast,
show
right?
you.
I'm excited.
Yes, it is. I just pulled it up, but it was so close. It was between. This is the next.
I know it was almost Braiding Sweetgrass, which is on my TBR. It would have been perfect. It would have been.
Also, it's on Scribd. The Braiding Sweetgrass. I mean, so I was rooting for
Braiding Sweetgrass is fantastic. I do recommend if you guys. I recommend that coming back.
We could read it in November. It's in that Indigenous something month. I can't keep track of the names of things.
I feel like an old, but I cannot find the discussion.
Native American Heritage. You said
did you say yes to the rule bot? Because you have to tell the rule bot that you read the rules to see all the things.
Oh. I see it now.
No, every day I'm asking.
An old like me say yes to the rules pod so that you can see, because I keep hearing like, oh, the discussion was great, and I was like, I didn't see a discussion. You
didn't read, Mara. You didn't read the first intro thread.
Oh my god! And there's literally like 20
This happens in my Discord on the regular, where I feel like people are like, nothing happens in this Discord. I'm like, no, but you haven't read the rule bot, and I'm too tired to tell you people to keep doing it.
I'm so
I am so bad at Discord. I mean, I'm learning, but so I think so. Cast will be for September, and then I think Braiding Sweetgrass for November, because I have that one too, and I've been hearing that it's amazing. So
it's almost
everyone's been praising it.
Yeah,
but everyone's been praising Cast as well. So
yeah, Cast is good. Braiding Sweetgrass though is unique, I feel like, in terms of its genre. Or like I haven't read a lot of science nonfiction like that before, because I read it almost as like a daily devotional.
And it's like a nutrition-ish science book too, right? Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
And sort of kind of a memoir.
It's like more of like memoir.
Okay.
Science
All
book.
I know is my cousin recommended it to me. It's like a real life person keeps telling me to read this, so I should do that. Not that you guys aren't real, but you know.
It's fine. I'm a robot. Every time it asks me on the computer I'm like, can't get past it.
I mean, the internet keeps telling me I'm not real every day, so.
Yeah. Hey, interesting to be living in this simulation and just be a collective hallucination.
Yeah, Cass is going to make us angry, I think, which is why I think Braiding Sweetgrass next will be nice. It'll be different.
Nice. I've heard the audiobook is great too. So yeah, but I mean, that's on brand for me. Usually the nonfiction I seem to read and just makes me angry.
I want to read
happier nonfiction, so strap me for that.
They can't. I'm like, I know there's happy, like a book. She reads so much nonfiction, and I'm like, I need to pick up some of her happier recommendations about like birds or butterflies.
Yeah.
What's the Patrick Keefe one you hauled recently in one of your haul videos? That's one I want to read because I've read his one on Northern Ireland and the IRA, and that one was really good. Say Nothing. That's what it was called.
Say Nothing.
Empire of Pain about the Sackler family who created.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I will be livid, but I want to read that one.
I just watched John Oliver's.
Me too. Yeah. The part 3
on the Sacklers. Ooh.
Yeah.
Aye.
I need to pour a glass of whiskey before I read that because, good Lord.
Do you have that one?
Yeah, I have it on audio.
Okay.
I haven't read it yet.
I'm like, yeah, I know. She said, so I tagged Olive when I hauled the book on my stories on Instagram, and she was like, have something nice and fluffy prepared to read after you read Empire of Pain because you're going to be so heated. And I was like, oh, great.
I'm looking for like happy nonfiction to recommend to you, but I'm looking at like Stand from the Beginning, White Trash, Heavy.
I was also thinking about what happy nonfiction do I have to recommend, and all I'm thinking is the Victims of Jack the Ripper, Radium Girls.
Yeah, exactly.
Radium Girls is anger inducing, but like also very cool.
Yeah.
I get a lot of anger when I read that because it's like it's very much like what we're in now, where it's like we know science and we're ignoring it because capitalism, and I hate.
I would also recommend
one.
Go for it. This is not.
Oh, sorry. A Secret Life of Trees by Michael Wolleben. It's a very it's basically about trees and how trees form like large organisms and are like basically have like almost parent-child relationships with each other and stuff like that. And it's so much fun to just listen to that book and walk in nature.
What is it called again?
Secret Life of Trees by, I think it's Peter Wolleben.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. Somebody said celebrity memoirs are fun. I would recommend My Life in France as like an autobiography. It's lovely.
Yes, The Simpsons was fun.
This is not light, but I think if you like, I very much recommend No Visible Bruises. What We Don't Know About Domestic Violence Can Kill Us by Rachel Louise Snyder. This was just since we talked about that in this chat. If you're looking for a genre-wise, it's pretty interesting because it's somewhere between reportage and true crime. And I learned a lot about domestic violence and how to be supportive of people who are going through that. So
I could also recommend, if you want to know more about the Palestine situation, this is an older work, but a very approachable nonfiction. This is Joe Sacco's Palestine, and it is a graphic comic book journalism all about Palestine. So
I'm going to put that in my card. What was his last name?
Joe Sacco, Sacco. He's like
adding books to my list.
I was going to say, this is not good for my...
No.
He is Maltese American journalist, and he's basically his whole shtick is graphic journalism.
Okay.
The Hidden Life of Trees. Oh my gosh, I'm about to get that.
Yeah, that sounds lovely.
Yes.
I like that someone's nonfic reads
the audio as well.
This book, she has like bird books, like every like critter, she's got a nonfiction recommendation. So if you're just looking for,
Dinosaurs.
The Rise and Fall of the Dinosaurs was really fun. That is a fun one.
What?
But it does have the fall, so they all die, you know.
Well, but spoiler alert, you knew that.
I mean, actually, they do live on in birds, so there you go.
Yeah. I live near turkeys. I see velociraptors every day.
Yeah.
They're actually terrifying. Like, I'm not unafraid of turkeys.
Yeah.
I don't like birds.
Neither do I.
At all.
I love birds.
I don't like birds.
No.
I specifically hate chickadees. Chickadees are my nemesis.
I like birds so much.
Oh.
That I even have like
Oh,
Is it a finch?
Oh, yeah.
it is a finch.
It's very on brand. No, I mean, like, it's funny because my best friend's getting married. She works at Mass Audubon, loves birds. My cousin, who I'm super close to, has been banding birds for 10 years and keeps getting Lyme disease because she's out in the field. And I'm just like, you guys are obsessed with birds. And like, I'm the type of person who keeps my cats indoors. But if my cat got outdoors and got a bird, I would say good job. Like, I'm a bad person.
I mean, I love birds, but not enough to get Lyme disease.
Yeah, I think you got to have a line there. That feels like a pretty good place to draw it.
That's what I'm saying. But, you know, I am a city girl, so I really have nothing. I have no relationship to nature.
My dream is, like, I absolutely hate nature. Like, I have like lived life in a rural farm as a rural farm kid. Nature and me are over. Urban cities for life. But I still have a dream of raising chickens.
Okay.
I love eggs so.
Oh,
yes.
All right. Well, Jess, one day you have to read all these so you can make your video on your channel of happy nonfiction book recommendations.
Oh my God.
Yes.
I need to
make that your next vlog. I don't know. Take 6 months.
drag I keep needing to read. She Come By It Natural by Sarah Schmarsh is about Dolly Parton, and that was really happy.
I need to read that.
I remember when was that in one of your vlogs, Mara? Like your cat picked your TBR?
Yes, my cat picked my TBR, and he picked that for me. It was really good.
I don't remember the name of the book, but I can link it in the group chat at some point. But like there's this book all about history through fabric and like thread, like how fiber has basically
Mara's reaction is making me live.
I want to read that. Like,
is that one that Rachel read?
Yes, okay. It is.
My BookTube worlds all collide.
So, I'm a big old nerd. I just love anything that's history.
And this beautiful.
This is the timeline of the world, and it's like about like.
I love that.
Oh my God!
It's so cool. Anyway, so anything that's like an unusual history of the world, I love.
Yes, this is about to be. Yeah, I love this. So you don't have to read it. Okay, I'm just gonna make a happy nonfiction TBR video.
Yeah, and then you can check in like a year. It's like the 5-star prediction videos, you know, and just like forget about it for a year and come back.
Well, like I'm working on some video ideas that's going to involve me reading a lot more nonfiction on specific topics. So like I'm very excited if people have like unusual nonfiction book recommendations.
I mean, have you read In the Dream House? That's a memoir by Carmen Maria Machado.
I have.
What qualifies as unusual?
Like
Caitlin Doughty, is she unusual? Like
I mean, I love Caitlin Doughty, but no, I'm thinking like I don't know. I saw a video the other day from Tiffany Furr about it was all about a book called Teeth, and it was basically just about like teeth.
So more like topics are unusual.
Yeah, like unusual histories or unusual, just like something that's like interesting, but maybe a little bit off the beaten path.
Yeah, no, I get that.
Fabric book. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, what is the fabric book? Do we know?
I don't know the name of it.
I am just trying to see.
I just know that I heard about it on. There's a channel called Kalanati. I don't even know how to spell it. Who
Kalanadi.
And like also her channel, she makes her own like yarn and stuff and dyes it herself. And like, yeah, you should check her out. She also is a very well thought out booktuber. Like she's fantastic.
There's one is
dress
codes: How the Laws of Fashion Made History by Ford Richard Thompson is the first one.
All right, so I'm gonna type it in the private chat for you, Mara, because I don't know how to. This is the channel that she like once a month talks about the stuff she makes, and she's gone through a journey with like fabric and yarn and dyeing her own stuff.
Okay, let me subscribe.
Yeah.
Now we're just like a recommendation stream. Like we're all just recommending.
She's also nominated for a Hugo for SFF like fans.
Yes,
cool.
I mean, I'm always up to talking about Rachel because
Rachel's channel is everything to me.
Who is Rachel?
She's another booktuber. Basically, me and Angela just follow her for all the sci-fi and nonfiction recommendations.
Yeah, I mean, she reads a lot of. Well, she reads also cozy mysteries too. She just found that knitting vampire cozy mystery series,
which I read because of her.
Like, she reads all over the place. She's very eclectic and well-spoken.
Okay, also the cover of Dress Codes, How the Laws of Fashion Made History, it is very lovely because it's just like a dandy in hose. Like, it looks like it's probably like Louis XVI and his little white hose.
I was sold on that book with this quote. It was not the first time I had caused a political scandal, and it would not be it was not the first time I had caused a revolution, and it would not be the last. That was the quote, and I was like, okay, I'm sold. I need this book in my life.
Ooh, cultish.
Oh, I have that coming today. That's my next book.
Gosh,
I'm excited for when this ends because my eBay just told me the book I bought by Nikki Drayden showed up. That I'm not going to read for like 5 months, but
it's there.
Still
and
exciting to get it.
It's ready for you.
Oh, I've been loving Nikki Drayden's work. She is underread in SFF spaces.
She's on my list because of you. I need to get to her.
You really do. You really do. I don't even know if you'll like it, but you just should. Just so you have a bigger channel. You just need to talk about it.
Yes, ma'am. I have a Catherine the Great, a book about Catherine the Great that I need to read.
Was that from Olive's recommendation?
Yes.
She is when I think of like Russian nonfiction, I just think of Olive.
I got 2 because of her, and I need to read those. I just sometimes I'm like, oh, I just want to read nonfiction. I'm like, feel kind of guilty because I'm like, I know most people like viewing for like book reviews or wrap-ups like want fiction, but sometimes I'm like, I just want to drop all this fiction and read nonfiction.
I mean, I say do what you want. You're gonna get enough views on your CommuniTEA, and like people will then start following you for what you want to read.
I mean, am I the weird one where I followed Jess because her wrap-ups were the first thing I saw, and then the community stuff came after?
Those wrap-ups that brought you in? Just kidding.
But also, like, sometimes I like watching people who have wrap-ups of books I don't read. Like, I don't read half the stuff Mara reads, but it's like I live vicariously through that reading experience. Like, there's a vibe I sense of reading romance and cozy mysteries.
Angela, you've been reading the Alien Warrior King's Accountant?
It's honestly what I want to read. Like, when I'm in that mood, it's like the next step when it's like, I want that. But it's very specific when I want that. It like happens like 3 times a year.
Yeah. It's there when you're ready.
I have nothing against it. It's just I have a very specific mood reading for that type.
Yeah.
I mean, I swear I have so many people that I follow and I love their content, and I read maybe an eighth of what they read. But it's nice to have like variety.
Yeah.
That's why I never have this situation where people are always talking about the same books, because I follow so many different people.
Same.
Yeah. And also you have Nigel. Nigel will always give you the subs, so you'll be fine.
Yeah.
The star. He's getting his beauty rest right now. Yeah. I'm mad that y'all gave me all these dang on books. I just had
You're gonna have to do a nonfiction book haul.
That are just like I need to put somewhere, and I'm like, well,
and I'm working on a couple videos that I'm like, well, at least I can say that this was specifically for this video, so I can write it off as an expense on my taxes. That's at least nice.
Yeah,
that is important. Well, this was great. Wait, what's a few more? What's Rachel's channel?
I just typed it in the actual comments.
Paulinati.
Yeah, gotcha.
Hi, the book, Diamond Forest.
Threads of Life. Ooh, more about fabric? Threads of Life.
I guess you guys are going to get a video about these books, because...
Also, there's another book called, I think, Life of Colors or something, which is excellent. It basically goes through every single color and how it has been historically manufactured and made, and what's it made of, and like the history behind it. So
yeah, I read that.
In all those happy non-violent non-fictions.
Wait, what was that called again?
The
History of Color, The Life of Color.
I think it's The Life of Color.
I read that when I was in college, and I remember being like really, it was like I went on like a little stretch of like reading histories of objects. That's a fun genre of nonfiction. Like there was, what was his name? Mark something. He had one about like cod. He had one about salt. And it was just like how these different objects influenced history. That was like a whole subgenre of historical nonfiction. That's really fun if you're in the mood for it.
Ooh. Question. What are y'all's opinions on the new book boom with like Book Talk and creators like Haley Pham or Stephanie Bower? I don't know that these people making book videos entering BookTube. I don't know these folks.
I'm 28. I don't know what TikTok does. I don't know what to do.
I
I don't use
skeptical of it in some ways. Just like, I don't know. My idealistic answer is like anything that gets people reading makes me happy, and that is true. I'm particularly biased against Haley Pham because of some of her past shenanigans and her slut shaming and classism against poor people in Greece. So, but she's a gajillionaire, so like she didn't care what I think. In general, on Book Talk, I think it's so cool that like bookstores literally have like Book Talk sections in their front area. Like I think that is A+, love it. Let's get more of it. Whatever gets people reading makes me happy.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I don't know who those folks are.
My friends asked me yesterday if I was going to get a book talk because they knew about my BookTube, and I'm like, I thrive on long form. I can't condense what I do in 10 to 20 minutes to like a minute. I don't know how to do that.
I am too old for TikTok. Like I can't even watch TikTok because it's too high energy for me. I just like get lost in the like.
It's a time suck. Don't start if you can't finish. Like don't start what you can't finish.
Also, yeah. I'm also very concerned about all the privacy situations. Like I wouldn't start a TikTok unless I had a burner phone with a prepaid account that had nothing to do with my emails or anything, because it sucks all your information. Not that none of the other apps don't, but I mean,
you've already made your peace with them.
Yeah, I kind of made my peace.
Google already owns my work and my personal life. So.
Well, and Amazon owns all of us because they're the ones who own the servers.
Amazon owns the whole internet. Well,
they have 90% of data.
I hate it.
but only 9% of the servers. So, but basically, like even if people don't buy Amazon server services, they buy the data analytics toolkit that they are.
Because if they made it so easy to use, and Microsoft's is hard to use, so that people use the easy one.
Microsoft just
trust me. AWS is not easy to use.
Well, that's my mom says she loves AWS over the Microsoft one. That's whenever I ask her. So, but I don't know how to do anything.
I agree. I saw that too. Smoky Glow poisoned me against Haley Pham. So.
Oh, I love Smoky Glow.
But me too. I watch her all the time.
I was her 665th subscriber.
What? Yes. Dang. I have not been watching her for that.
Because she was covering John Cuckian when that bullshit was going down. And, you know, she has a great personality. So when I was watching those videos, I was like, oh, she's so great. And so she's like my one where I'm like, I was in on the ground floor before
You're an OG.
Yeah, I love her. We have the same merch designer.
I need to get.
I need to see our shirt because it looks awesome.
I want that. It looks very cozy.
It is very cozy.
I love that.
Yeah, I like Spreadshirt. I've been happy with them.
Can you get the Deborah one in that hoodie?
Yeah. Okay. I want that.
Yeah.
Great.
I want that. Also, as an IT person, that Deborah thing works in that setting as well.
I've gotten several comments when I've worn that out and about of like, I don't like, because it just kind of works as sort of like almost like an anti-Karen kind of message. So yeah, it works on a lot of levels. God bless Nora. Anyway, it is like 11:30 Vareas. So
Yes.
Okay.
probably.
Well, thank you all for joining me. Thanks for joining in the discussion, everyone in the chat, and all of these books that are now on my TBR. But it's fine.
Yeah,
It's
that's a problem.
Positive, happy nonfiction. So September's read will be Cast. I'll probably make a short video about it. And yeah, yay! First book community read live stream. Woo! But thank you, everyone. Have a good evening. Toodles.
Toodaloo.
Bye.
Bye.